with you today. For the next 20-25 minutes, we're going to have a conversation about managing your web projects for your agency through Cloudways. I'm going to be sharing our history as to where we were and the problems that we had, how we solved those problems utilizing Cloudways, and also we're going to give you a little bit of a menu of how you can look at your existing processes and procedures, your existing infrastructure, and work out where you need to fix things and how perhaps you too could benefit from using Cloudways in your agency. Now, throughout this entire show, we are live and uncensored. Please note that there is a special code at the bottom of this screen. You can see it for Black Friday. You can use the code BFCM2020 to get 40% off your subscription for 4 months. That's pretty insane. So that's BFCM 2020 to get 40% off for 4 months. We shall leave that up. So today I want to share with you a little bit of our history. So we're going to throw some PowerPoint at you. I'm going to share some stories. Feel free to ask us some questions as well. If I get a chance, I'll throw some of those questions on the screen. Before we get cracking, if you are watching the replay, please type in the words replay so I know you are joining me on the replay. And if you're watching us live, why not throw in some emojis so we at least know there are a few people out there who are joining us today. Now let's switch up the screen so that you can see the full size, and let's jump into the time machine. All right. Many moons ago, we ran a full service agency. This meant we provided site builds, we provided apps, we provided, you name it, we provided it for anybody. And it was an extremely tough time. This is back in the early 2000s. We had to compete on service and on price because we had nothing that differentiated us against the competition. We therefore set ourselves up as a London-level agency based in Bedford, trying to attract people to the multiple services that we offered. And we ended up powering loads of really different websites that had really different needs across multiple hosting environments. We had Plesk, we had cPanel, we had custom servers that we'd put together for ourselves, we had custom code bases in multiple different code management applications. If you imagine we're using GitHub, we had SVN, so we were using SVN back then, but we were also using other version control methods as well, depending on what contractors we were working with. We just had a hot mess of services, multiple hosting environments, limited support from all of these different companies. It was hard to know where to go when we needed help with a server. So, for example, a client website goes down. We're now trying to figure out who we host it with, what the SLA we have with that host is, who we need to talk to get help from that host, and even if that sort of thing is covered. So you can imagine it was really stressful when things would go down. Very often, due to price, we were a slave to shared platforms, so we couldn't afford dedicated servers. We would have to go down the route of shared platforms, and if somebody else's website was caning the server resources, then our clients too would struggle. Or if we could get a dedicated server, we would have to put multiple of our own clients on those dedicated servers. Again, if one of our clients were caning that server, that was a massive problem to us. We were also restricted to those physical servers. So I remember one of the contracts we had a £500 a month dedicated server. It was dual core, which was pretty darn hot back then. We had 8 gig, I think, of RAM. It was a Linux-based server, but we were limited to that device. It was costing us a lot of money. It gave us a lot of bandwidth, but very soon we were peaking on things like the RAM. We needed to be able to scale, but we were stuck with that server. We had to spend more money to get that physical server upgraded, and eventually when the client completely outgrew that, we had to completely replace it. And this is in the early days now, where VMware and virtual servers was quite a new thing, so we were slave to the physical a lot of the time. We had no access to a scalable solution. We couldn't just increase the RAM like you can nowadays on, say, a virtual server. We had to make sure we did things physically. We were at the what's the word? We were at the whim or at the time. We had to rely essentially on the availability of the third party providers, and it was so frustrating. Just to migrate a site as well was always really slow. We did start to use newer tools as they came out, especially for WordPress, like Duplicator Pro, which I highly recommend for moving sites around. But back then, most of the time, we were stuck with zip files, downloading entire copies of databases and moving things across. And generally getting stuff installed was just a complete nightmare. So you can imagine we are a full service agency providing all sorts of websites that do different things for different people on different platforms with different types of servers, with different interfaces, with documentation all over the place, because we have to work out when you're working with this client, this is what you do. And when you work with this client, this is what you do. Oh, but if you work with this client, you need to call that service provider because they're currently supporting that element. Oh, my word. It was always a complete nightmare. So if you're feeling really stressed out right now, I'm really really sorry. And I would love to know in the comments if you've experienced this in the past. We are so lucky, aren't we, nowadays, that technology has moved on so significantly over the years to give us such greater control over how we support our clients, how we look after them. Let's take a look at where we are today. So right now we run a really successful agency. In my eyes, it's called Event Engine, and we're able to service conferences all around the world. We're looking after conference organizers. They are termed as PCOs. So what we've done is we've gone from a full service agency providing lots of different types of websites and services and apps to lots of different types of people. And we've gone right down to the PCO level where we're working with those conference organizers in sectors like science and in the public sector who create educational conferences. It's super, super niche. We know how to look after these people. We know how to get great sponsors to their events, great exhibitors. We know how to help them get footfall. We know how to support them with their marketing. We have all of these specialist skills that we can focus in on that particular channel. So we've been able to look after these clients. I mentioned they're in the public sector, so there's quite a few high-risk clients in amongst all of this where we have to make sure we protect them. They are a target for attacks. So you'll get a lot of bot attacks, etc., trying to bring those servers down. Some of these PCOs will manage hundreds of events around the world. So you can imagine that our databases are humongous. We need to make sure that we can provide them with really, really good support. And because these events, these websites are the front-facing element, they are the sales, the shop window, the place where people are attracted to come and join that event. We need to make sure that we provide good business continuity. We keep that site online as much as possible. And even more so now in this new normal, hopefully temporary new normal, roll on the vaccine, a lot of our event clients are now having to run their events through the website itself. So not only was this a sales vehicle to get footfall at the conference and to attract those participants, but it is now the place where people also come and meet and network and watch the live streams and access some of that gated content so they can enjoy a digital or a virtual conference. So that's where we're at today. We are absolutely loving what we do. We were really nervous when everything happened with COVID because we figured that events were going to have to stop for maybe over a year. But we've been able to shift with our niche and continue to focus on what we do best, which is building event websites and supporting those event clients with their events online, plugging in all of the relevant tech. So that's where we are today. We've been able to weather the storm, and we've had a platform that allows us to be ridiculously flexible and allows us to move with the times. You see, what we needed to achieve, we shared with you that history. What we needed to achieve was some form of platform that would give us the ability to do efficient, effective website builds. We needed that scalability. I needed to be able to add RAM. I needed to be able to add bandwidth. I needed server space. I wanted to be able to quickly migrate websites over, especially the way we operate at the moment. We have multiple site templates set up for different types of conferences, so we need to be able to migrate some of those over to different servers and then get our team adding in all of the relevant content. We also needed quick staging environments. We have a centralized code base for a lot of what we do. We call it Event Engine, and we need to ensure that we can maintain that code, we can test that code in multiple environments, and then push that out using Git onto multiple servers to ensure that everybody has got the latest and greatest code with all of the relevant bug fixes, etc. We've got multiple websites on one server, and we have one website on a whole server as well. We've got everything that we could possibly need, and it's not costing us an arm and a leg. We needed to be able to do huge WordPress multi-site installs. If you can imagine, on a cPanel server with a limit of say 4 or 8 gig of RAM, etc., you can really quickly hit the limit if you're running on say 2 to 300 multi-site websites. And with websites as a service, WAS as it's called, being really popular, I imagine there's a lot of people watching right now who are considering that route, and you really need a power server to be able to manage that many websites. We needed as well access to those big cloud players. Over the last few years, we've looked at the cloud players and we're trying to understand how can we run servers on these platforms. Great, we can fire up a quick droplet here, but we kind of felt on our own because there is documentation, but you need technical knowledge. We know how to build websites. We don't know how to support servers. So we needed to ensure that we found something that allowed us to tap into those cloud players and also enabled us to tap into some good support with some technical people, rather than us taking on the burden and the responsibility of ensuring that the server is up to date, that the server is still going strong. And finally, we needed to make sure that we had something that enabled real business continuity. If you're wondering what business continuity is, you may term it as disaster recovery planning, etc. Business continuity, essentially ensuring that you can look after your client, you can ensure that their website stays online for as long as possible. You probably will have some sort of service level agreement if you are providing hosting for your client. So that's all part of the business continuity plan. In many cases in contracts, you may also be held to that if you are perhaps selling. So if you're doing e-commerce, for example, you may be held specifically to some sort of SLA or to some sort of business continuity plan. You may also be held to things like backups as well. So again, with e-commerce, when you're selling products, etc., ensuring that all of that data is backed up and also is protected, especially again with things like GDPR. So these are all the things that we needed to achieve, and we were very grateful when the guys over at Cloudways came along and shared with us some of the incredible resources that they have. I've just seen a quick comment here from Jan saying it sounds like a nightmare. I was just sharing earlier, if you're just joining us, I was just sharing with you what my agency used to be like. Trust me, Jan, it was a complete nightmare. So we had a meeting with Cloudways, and we took a look at what they had to offer. And the very first thing that I jumped upon was the staging environments. If you imagine, we have code bases that we want to be able to test. We want to be able to test them on multiple different types of servers with different environments, with different settings, etc. So we were able to do that in a heartbeat. We could set up as many servers as we want, low cost, and run as many tests as we want. We could also run different versions of applications that we may be working on and different versions of websites. When we were using cPanel or Plesk, etc., on the different providers, we weren't able to create staging copies. We had to clone the website to an alternative version on a subdomain, and it got really, really hard to manage all of those data sets. Next, we needed that scalability. We wanted to be able to spark up a dedicated server when we needed to be able to spark one up. And we can do that now with Cloudways, which is phenomenal. But also we want to be able to vertically scale. So you can't always know when a project kicks off how big the server you have needs to be, especially if you are, say, selling on e-commerce and you've got the Black Friday deal coming up, etc. You could start with a standard server, but then vertically scale when you know that demand is going to increase. And that's exactly what we need to be able to do. We need to be able to increase with the demand, and that's available within the Cloudways platform for us, especially when we're running our virtual events. We were able to vertically scale a whole range of sales websites that actually became digital venues for those particular events. We need to as well be able to transfer between different servers, which is really cool. This is actually a feature we can do where we can move our applications from server to server, which is phenomenal. It's really easy. We can move things around, we can group things into projects, etc. And we can also, most importantly, I think for us, we mentioned our documentation. We can retain all of this in an interface that remains the same. We're no longer dealing with Plesk and with, I think we had WHCMS, we had Plesk, we had cPanel, we had 2 or 3 custom UIs as well that were dedicated to those particular hosts. So if you can imagine, just being able to document things was very hard. Being able to scale things was haphazard and very different between providers, etc. So being able to manage all of this in the same interface was just phenomenal for us. We talked earlier about migration and being able to migrate a website over. There are 2 great ways of doing that. Well, 3 really. Obviously, you can create clones instantly within Cloudways. Equally, you can use their migration tool if you're using things like WordPress, so you can pull that website straight across. And also for us, we can deploy via Git, which is super important. If we manage our central code base, we want to be able to push that out across multiple websites, ensuring that everyone has the latest and greatest. We focused as well earlier on these massive databases that we have. One of the databases that we operate on is around 15 gigabytes, believe it or not. That's insane, I know. There is an awful lot of content in there, a lot of data. We wanted a system that would allow us to scale the database as much as the server, and you'll see instances where you'll get a cPanel server and you are tied into the database that is on that server. Well, we are freed up using something like Cloudways because we can set up a nice, big, juicy database. We can add, I think on that screenshot, I can't actually see it, it's way too small for me. I think you can go up to hundreds of gigabytes in size. Clearly, I don't recommend having massive databases where you can. We are constantly having to clean up databases, especially when it comes to revisions, to get those figures down. But we certainly need something that can expand and that can support that size of database and support that number of connections. So again, if you're having a rush on your e-commerce website, for example, and so Black Friday is a great example, you need to make sure you've got a robust enough database server that can manage multiple connections. Many, say, cPanel environments will be restricted to, say, 10 or up to 50 connections at any one time, which means that everyone else has to go into a queuing system. So you really want to make sure that you've got something that can cope. And again, we've been super grateful for what we've been able to use inside of Cloudways. Business continuity is one of the biggest things for us. We are the shop front. Our websites serve as the e-commerce system for the events. The event will be advertised, all of its content will be available, but also the ability to purchase those tickets and to upgrade, etc., to register is all there. And our clients are all around the world. They are selling 24 hours a day through social media campaigns, through Google ad campaigns, through print media, through email marketing, all at different times of the day because they have global audiences. And it's essential and imperative that we keep those sites online and we retain that data and that we don't lose any of those transactions. So for us, it's great. We get daily backups. We've programmed the bot to give us warnings if there's any issues. So for example, if we're coming up to a resource, to the resource of one of our servers, etc., then the bot will let us know. We've got access to the API, so we can be proactive. There's some great documentation I'll tell you about in a second. We again can do things like fast clones, fast redeployment as well. So if there's a problem with a client site, we can either pull a backup or we can do a clone onto an alternative server, or we can vertically scale. We've got all of those tools at our disposal if we need to be either proactive or reactive where we need to be. And finally, finally, as well, something that was rolled out quite recently is bot protection. We were spending a lot of money through places like Security, etc., because we were wanting to protect these websites from bots, which were essentially using all of the resource. And with the bot protection that's now built in, which I believe is done through Malcare, that has taken gigabytes of data transfer away from these websites and allowed us to protect both the WP admin but also the performance of the websites as well. So I'd highly recommend that you check that out as well. So with that business continuity, that provides us the assurance for us, but it also allows us to provide that assurance to our clients. Now, we don't just have these pre-made websites set up for our clients. We also build specific websites. So if you imagine, especially those virtual environments we've got set up, each one of those is custom to the clients that we work with. Each event is very different. The agenda, the format, the content, the type of communication, the placement of content, how people will interact. They're all custom projects. So we're going to need to get them set up either on their own server or on one of our existing servers within Cloudways. We need to be able to give the relevant people within our organizations or our collaborators access to the information and the tools that they need to without giving them access to other areas. Again, with GDPR, again, with things like e-commerce, we don't want third-party contractors being able to access the database of a highly valuable e-commerce website that we might be supporting on another project. So all of that within one interface with other providers in the past has been really hard for us to provide. We've had to have our collaborators, our team members, ask us to do things, and then we have to go and do things for them. Whereas now we can get all of that set up with the user permissions, with teams, and with projects that are all set up inside of Cloudways, and then we can attribute that either to server at the server level, and we can also attribute that to the application level. So if we have applications that are across different servers, that is fine. I can still only give you access to particular applications, and as well I can kind of increase the level that you would get. You can either get support access, you can see here as well, I can push it up to the billing access as well for our accounts department, who are obviously monitoring that all of the time, or just simply the console access so people can get access and support in that manner. I mentioned earlier as well API, the API for documentation. We've actually been developing a plugin. We're looking at releasing that maybe in the next 3 or 4 months publicly on the WordPress codex, on the WordPress repository, because we think it'll be very helpful for a lot of people. But we've been working now with the API. It's fully documented. You can go and check that out over on cloudways.com. Just scroll to the bottom. There's a link to the API there. But you'll see that you can be proactive with your support. You can spark up new servers as well. You can spark up backups with the API. But most importantly, you can control things like your backup. You can control things like notifications and triggers, etc. So really important for us to be able to be proactive in the support that we're providing, but also to make it ridiculously easy for us to do things from the back end of our websites rather than, again, having to log into other control panels. And then finally, we also need help. I said earlier that we are not a technical company. We are a company that thrive on development. We can work with APIs. We can work with PHP, JavaScript. We can create phenomenal websites. We can use WordPress as a framework to create powerful applications online. But what we are not are server support gurus. We do not understand the ins and outs of servers. What we need is a team of people that can help us, and that's what we've had with Cloudways. Not only have we had that central interface to allow us to manage all of our sites and our projects and to manage our team, but we then have access to the Cloudways team as well, who look after anything from email deliverability. I was dealing with email deliverability on a shopping cart just the other day to ensure that we could use the Elastic Mail service and ensure that each one of those transaction emails were hitting the right people at the right time. But they'll also help with things like performance and more. They've got different tiers of support as well. So if you've got particular projects that you need more advanced support on, then you can take a look at the different tiers of support to give you that peace of mind that you are not on your their own. I mentioned, didn't I, that back in the day when we were looking at getting into cloud computing, we were going direct to these different cloud providers. Their documentation looked complicated. We felt like we were going to be on our own because we could spark up a new server, but maybe if the next update for the OS was ran and caused an issue, we were kind of on our own. We don't feel like we're on our own when we are working with Cloudways with that central interface. We're still using all of these different cloud providers, but we're doing it through the safety net of the Cloudways team. So for us, that was really, really important. You see, we had all those problems that I shared right at the beginning, and we chose a platform that allowed us to standardize, automate, scale, and document. Let's go through these because these are important for what you might be looking at doing for your own agency. So with regards to standardization, that's standardizing your processes. It's hard to standardize your processes if you're using multiple tools, multiple services. It's hard to standardize those interfaces again if you're using multiple tools, multiple interfaces. So I'd encourage you to find ways of amalgamating everything together. We only now use a couple of control panels, one for all of the domain management and then one for our cloud management through Cloudways. That allows us to create all of our documentation, all of our procedures, and the fact that we're using Cloudways in one platform, despite we're using different cloud providers, the interface is still the same. So the process is still the same. It makes it ridiculously easy. You want to be able to automate things as well. And for us, we've been able to automate our stacks, our setups. We can automate that deployment, especially when we're pushing stuff out. We can track what's going on. And of course, we want to be able to automate those backups. And we've even worked with the API so that we can trigger particular backups when we want those to happen. So, for us, that was important. I imagine for yourselves, it's important for you to be able to automate as much as possible rather than every new build you have to do it from scratch. Can you clone something across from an existing stack? Can you use a template? Can you duplicate a server? What can you do with the provider that you've got to quickly deploy a new setup? For us as well, scalability was ridiculously important, especially, like I said, for the vertical scaling. Do note there are certain platforms you can't go the other way with those, so do be careful on scaling. On certain servers, once you scale up, you are stuck at up. So make sure you are careful there. We needed something as well that would complement our disaster recovery process or our business continuity. So we said, haven't we, the backups, the ability to quickly restore, but also that server independency. So for us, that means we can move an application from one server to another. We can update the DNS, and very quickly we can be pointing a server to a completely new space. We mentioned security. I certainly am not bad-mouthing them, but also you can look at Cloudflare as well. If you want to manage where a domain goes, you can actually use services such as Cloudflare or Security. And what you can do here is if you have a problem with a server, you can change where you are pointing that particular website pretty much in a heartbeat, which allows you to get around that DNS propagation issue. And within a few minutes, you could have a website that is not performing very well and switch it over to the backup or move it over to a different application. And then finally, we mentioned documentation. We needed a system that would allow us to document, but also provided lots of really good documentation. And we've noticed that Cloudways are not shy when it comes to getting into the real tech detail. They will deep dive and go into the code and provide you configuration support, etc. And they will go down, into WordPress. They will go into Magento, whatever service provider you are using. These guys are on it, and I love the sort of tech, the sort of support that they are offering. Now, I'd encourage you, if you're looking to streamline your web projects, then just take a look at what you're doing now and see whether or not any of that correlates with that story at the beginning of how our agency operated. What are your infrastructure bottlenecks? For us, it was multiple service providers, multiple interfaces. We didn't know which server and which service provider was providing the service for which customer. Therefore, we weren't sure who we were meant to approach for support. So having all of that documented was near on impossible. Pinpoint any areas of risk as well or of vulnerability. For us, there were a lot of areas of risk. Everything I just described was risk because I could not support my clients well. But equally, I was using servers that were underpowered. So those servers could easily be compromised. They could easily be brought down. So there was still an inherent amount of risk. So take a look. Where are your points of risk? Plan out as well your ideal development. Your ideal development workflow. And if you think, I'm trying to think of a great example. With back in the day when we were doing our development, what we were doing was working on local host servers because things were too slow. So we would work on a local host server and then we would update everything via FTP and get that online and then start testing and start creating more and more clones. What we're able to do now is quickly have those stacks set up. So take a look. What is your ideal development environment? And then see if you can use the existing tools out there to innovate. What can you use on, say, something like Cloudways or other providers that give you access to the cloud rather than relying on some of the old tech, which is not as well supported, which does have those bottlenecks and which does give you that inherent risk? I would encourage you, right now there is an amazing offer. It's BFCM 2020, and that will get you 40% off Cloudways for the next 4 months. That is a Black Friday only deal. If you are encouraged or inspired by anything that I've shared over the last 20 or so minutes, I just really want to quickly remind you where we were. So let's take a look. In that time machine, we had multiple hosting environments. We had limited support from multiple companies. We didn't know who to go for. We were a slave to shared platforms. Therefore, we had performance issues. We were restricted by the servers that we were using. We had no access to scalable platforms. We had no access to the cloud. We had slow site migration and slow installs. Where are we today? We've grown a company that focuses on conferences and allows us to support clients all around the world, create amazing projects and work with wonderful clients and collaborate with our team. I shared with you here what we needed to achieve. These are our key points. These are our vulnerabilities. These are our issues. I'd encourage you to review these, see if any of these correlate with yours. And then when we looked at Cloudways, we recognized that each and every one of these areas were covered. They would help us build the agency that we wanted so that we could support our clients and build an agency that we loved. These are the key takeaways. These are what we needed from a platform. And again, I'd encourage you to take a look at these. Are these what you need from your platform? And finally, ask yourself the following questions. What are your infrastructure bottlenecks? What are those areas of vulnerabilities? What would be the ideal way that you would develop your websites and roll them out and test them and so on? And finally, what cloud technology can you utilize? Or spoiler alert, Cloudways. What can you utilize rather than being held back by some of the old tech? Again, I'd encourage you, it's BFCM 2020 for the Black Friday deal, 40% off for 4 months. That is insane. Thanks very much, folks. You are all wonderful. Sorry about the blip there. I wasn't sure if we got disconnected. I think we're still live. If you have questions, please hit us up in the comments. I will come back here tomorrow and I'll check out any of the comments. If you're watching the replay, let us know. Just type in the words replay. If you've taken up the offer, I'd love to know. So go ahead, check it out and tell me what your experiences have been with the Cloudways platform. And again, any questions, the Cloudways team or myself will be checking out those comments over the next few days. So, folks, have a wonderful evening, morning, afternoon, or night. Take care, and I believe we'll see you tomorrow with me and Jan as we have yet another webinar coming to you with the Cloudways Mavericks. So take care, cheerio, and